infinite and eternal being. Stein will draw a Trinitarian analogy, so that the human person is in fact mirroring the Trinity of the divine Godhead, in that a human person is a Trinity of body, of soul, and spirit. But Edith Stein really emphasizes strongly the role of spirit. So what is this spirit? And Sister Fran talked a bit about this back last August. And to remind you, spirit is that which freely gives and diffuses itself. So to quote from Edith Stein, it is in the nature of spirit to be open to all existence, to be filled with that which is, and to have its life, its actual being, in the most intimate contact with that which is. So what characterizes spirit, and this is important, is that it is going out of self. And then this becomes a question of how we use our human freedom. And going out of ourselves requires this self-transcendence. It's an advance in the capacity to interact with and to comprehend what is outside ourselves. But we can only go outside ourselves if we are in fact centered, if we are secure in the core of our own being. But this center cannot be the self in the sense of ego. God has to be the center. And as a little sidetrack, this applies to empathy too, because Stein wrote a lot about empathy, her doctoral dissertation being about the problem, as she called it, of empathy, which she picked up a bit from Husserl, the teacher. And part of this is the question, it's just a philosophical question, how do we know that there's other people out there, since the work of, let's say, Descartes, we're talking about modern philosophy. Okay, I think, therefore I am. Actually, if you went back to Augustine, you'd have, I doubt, therefore I am. So, it's not new, but okay, so I know that I exist. How do I know that there are other eyes out there? And for Stein, it was a question of empathy. Through empathy, we can know that there are other eyes out there like my eye. So just a little sidetrack, but the point is that even to empathize, we have to go beyond ourselves to meet that other self. Otherwise, it's just projection. And it is in this area of becoming centered in yourself, to be able to go outside of yourself, that Stein draws on the spiritual masters, such as John of the Cross. And so, going back to then last August, Sister Fran ended the subject with the point that our goal is to become fully human, and with Jesus as the exemplar of the one who was most fully human. So, what this movement of spirit is, it's what we've been hearing all along. It's what's in the ratio. It is this theme of transformation. And how does this transformation work? Well, Edith Stein begins finite and eternal being, which is largely a project to reconcile Thomism with modern philosophy by considering especially the concepts of potency and act. So she pulls out of us this pair of concepts that she's going to use to begin her examination of being. And not to belabor potency and act, you've probably heard so much about it that you're quite sick of it. But essentially what we're talking about is going from what might be to what actually is. Again, we're talking about modern philosophy, so after Descartes, considering this from the standpoint of our own being. But Edith Stein notes that our being is nothing. The term she uses in finite and eternal being, Nichtigkeit, nothingness, that's what we are. We're contingent. Our being is constantly being given to us, and yet this is where we start, from this impoverished contingent being. We start from nothing. How do we go forward from nothing? Only by grace. So our being is a constant becoming. We're constantly drawn along from this potency to actuality. But But then if we are to become fully actualized, fully human, this is, again, pulling in this theme of movement to spirit. This means being conformed to spirit, being conformed to God. And this might remind us of the Eastern concept of traditional theosis of divinization. We are to become partakers through God's gift of the divine nature. And so this is for us, this is transformation that we want to concern ourselves with. This is the move from potency to actuality. And notably, it is a gift of God. It is grace. But for us, the Carmelite spiritual tradition, the spiritual masters, teach us different ways, the way of John the Cross, the way of Therese, ways that we make ourselves open to the gift of transformation. And so finally, as I hand it over to Carlos for the next leg of this, the conformity that we're talking about, the conformity to God, means that we mesh ourselves and our plans, our goals for our lives with God's plan.
And this appears simultaneously as meaningful and intelligible, from what is merely accidental and which seems by itself meaningless and unintelligible. For example, I intend to pursue certain studies, and to this end, select a university which promises to provide some special incentive in my chosen field. Here we have a meaningful and intelligible coherence of motives and circumstances. But the fact that in that particular university town, I make the acquaintance of a person who is accidentally matriculated at the same institution, and that one day I accidentally become engaged in talking on questions regarding an outlook on life, this seems at first glance hardly a thoroughly intelligible coherence of events. And yet, when many years later I reflect upon my life, it becomes clear to me that this particular conversation turned out to be of decisive significance for my life. That is what perhaps more essential than all my studies, so that now I am inclined to think that this encounter may have been precisely the reason why I had to go to that town. In other words, what did not lie in my plan lay in God's plans. And the more often such things happen to me, the more lively becomes in me the conviction of my faith that from God's point of view, nothing is accidental. That my entire life, even in the most minute details, was predesigned in the plans of the divine providence, and is thus, for the all-seeing eye of God, a perfect coherence of meaning. Once I begin to realize this, my heart rejoices in anticipation on the light of glory, in whose sheen this coherence of meaning will be fully unveiled to me. This paragraph is taken from Finite and Eternal Being. And now we can have a moment of meditation, and we can use the 3 questions. What has been the movement of your life to this point? How have you come to where you are? And how have you been led by God?
One of my favorite teachers in the Eastern Church, Archbishop Raya, talks about the 4 steps of love, and I think it's especially relevant. And he says that it starts with presence and culminates in identification. And identification, in essence, is what we're talking about in moving into actuality. Because we're conglomerate beings, we're incredibly complex, we have histories, we're basically built choice upon choice upon choice. So we're going to enter into a prayerful mode of resolution and express wishes. In Edith Stein's teaching, she talked about the outpouring of self. So the first step is to identify ways in which we'd like to grow in the outpouring of self. That is, ways to grow in our identification with God, with Christ. 3 is just a random number. If you only find 1, it's fine. If you find 3, great. More, even more wonderful. Once we've identified that, I'm asking you to identify obstacles because they always happen. And I believe that if you kind of have a game plan together and you're prepared, your chances of moving through that are much higher. And Edith Stein also talked a lot about that. She separated the sensory from the spiritual, and she likened the process of breaking from the sensory to that of the dark night. Those are attachments. So you might want to consider your attachments of obstacles. Maybe some fears or hopes that you haven't quite let go of. And I think for some of us, information that's especially relevant because we're always, I think, contending with that, our discernment process. I know I am. And then I'm going to ask you to take a minute and consider what you think might be effective or helpful when the obstacles come. And obstacles is just a word. It could be a challenge, a question. It could be minor, it could be major. But what could throw your journey deeper into God into question? What is going to pull you off track for a moment? And this is incredibly personal. I'm not going to ask you to share it with anybody. But I think, it might be something to take to spiritual direction. And this is just one way that I think, and we've discussed it as a group, a way to take her teaching and apply it into our life. I know for me personally, this is something that I look at every day. And, it helps me realize my dependence on God, and it helps me realize my sinfulness even more. But it also increases my level of hope. So I'm going to give you some time. I will put some music on, so you can just kind of sit there with your pen and journal away. And then we'll come back and we'll recap. So we'll take about 10 minutes, and we'll recap as a group, and maybe open the floor for a little discussion and questions. So we'll start with questions for us first, but if anybody wants to comment, and then we'll go from there. One of the concerns with Edith's work is finding that complete freedom, and I think Edith found it. Because only it's in the outpouring of self does one find the individual. That's the paradox, and that's what's really hard to get your head around. But there has to be a balance between the two, and I think she found that complete freedom